Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar, Burnt Out in Glam World, How to Build Resistance in Survival Mode. Just a quick note about us and about me, especially if this is one of your first webinars you've joined us for. I'm Rachel Woody, I'm the founder and director of Relicura, and we specialize in collections management and digital collections programs. I have had 20 years in counting now in archives, museums, and cultural heritage institutions. A little bit of housekeeping, a link to this recording and links to some of the resources that we're sharing, of which there are a lot for this webinar, will be emailed out within 24 hours of today's premiere. And as we go, links will be shared in the chat with you too. This session is pre-recorded, and we do that so I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you and then also answer any follow-up questions in the chat box. As we go, and because we have the access to the chat box, you can use it if you have a YouTube or Google account, I believe, and you can ask your questions, you can share your own insights and comments while we're going through the webinar. And then this webinar, because we're using the YouTube platform, you can also access the YouTube tools, of which closed captioning is a part of that. And then just please remember and respect that this is my content and intellectual property subject to copyright, except of course when we are referencing sources, which are sprinkled throughout this webinar especially. So big topic today, and we're going to attempt to do this in under our usual hour allotment. First one is definition of burnout, make sure we're on the same page. We'll also cover some causes of burnout, first starting generally and moving into a discussion of why our field is unwell, some of the more systemic issues specific to our field, and how that contributes to burnout. We'll then cover how burnout takes a toll, which is sort of, well, can be depressing. It is important for us to realize that, especially as we're going through it and trying to find relief. And then speaking of relief, moving towards how to build resilience, and particularly important in a time where being under duress and continually stressed out is perhaps going to be continuing for months, if not a couple of years. And so how do we sort of shore ourselves up while we're still in the midst of sort of fight or flight stressful mode? We'll then summarize strategies, and then there'll be some time for Q&A for us at the end as things come up. Quick disclaimer, because we are sort of veering just a bit into an adjacent area. I am not a HR specialist. I am not a legal specialist or representative. I am not a medical expert. I am a museum and archives cultural sector worker. So laws and policies that we may mention in the course of sort of our wellness exploration in this area is subject, of course, to specific geographic location, organizations, etc. So one of those like general guidelines, but I'm not an expert, nor do things universally apply to where you are. Okay, getting into it. What causes burnout? Burnout, while seemingly a popular term, especially when we went through it with a global pandemic, is a medical condition of being perpetually chronically stressed. And that is typically in more than one area of your life, though it can certainly seem more present. And so for us, it can show up in work. It can also show up in our home life. And most of the time it is at both, unfortunately. It can be persistent physical and emotional exhaustion. Rarely is it just one. And then it presents with other, to use a medical term, comorbidities or other sort of health, mental and physical ailments that can arise from that sort of chronic stress state, of which anxiety and depression are big ones. Also things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and substance abuse. So being aware that burnout, while not necessarily a medical diagnosis, certainly has medical diagnoses that come with it or can come as like a after effect of the result of you being perpetually stressed. So what causes burnout? And this is a brief list. Of course, we could find many other things to enumerate that causes burnout, but essentially for us, it's a lack of control, typically over our situation. Again, thinking both at work and at home. It's a lack of resources, and that can encompass quite a bit of resources in terms of like maybe it's financial resources, maybe it's mental health support, maybe it's the right tools to do the job. Unclear job expectations, and while not the topic of today, can certainly then start getting into other areas of imposter syndrome, et cetera, that we've talked about before, which can be present, especially in unhealthy work environments. Things like zero feedback, late feedback, or only negative feedback, again, typically at work, though of course can be present at home as well. Having a hypercritical boss or boss who micromanages, and while it necessarily doesn't have to be your direct boss, anytime there's toxic culture in your particular institution, and any sort of form of mental bullying can often be present, unfortunately, for our field. Speaking of which, why is our field unwell? And it's certainly not the only field that suffers from these problems. We have very similar sort of mental health and physical health adjacent issues along with the nonprofit sector, often stemming from similar systemic issues of things like lack of resources, lack of people trained appropriately, lack of leaders having appropriate leadership training. But I think it's important for us to explore why for Glam, so galleries, libraries, archives, museums, why is it for us in this cultural heritage sector that may exacerbate things more so than sort of the more general populace? So things that can exist, poorly trained managers, and often for us, people who tend to make it into those leadership positions are more subject matter experts. They've been promoted up, which is a wonderful practice, but they are often then not afforded or been encouraged or supported to acquire the necessary managerial and leadership skills they need to healthily lead a team in this field. Unreasonable staffing levels. And I feel like this is just an area that gets worse and worse and worse, and I have yet to see better, but we've all experienced it regardless of how healthy our institution seems. Usually there's never enough staff to do the actual work that the institution is trying to take on. There's often a requirement of overwork, especially in our culture of being passionate and wanting to do things the right way. There's a lack of social support, which can exist within your work community as well as external. There can be gaslighting and manipulative tactics, and that is especially true if you are in a workplace that is very toxic and or you are lacking a boss or supervisor that is healthily involved as a manager. We have a culture of that perpetual sacrifice, so taking advantage of our passion for the field and the fact that we're not necessarily in it to be rich, but we're certainly in it to make a livable wage doing the work that we do, and being paid our value in that. And yet we are often manipulated or encouraged to buy into the just do a little bit more with less, just pitch in, the typical idioms or adages of just do this because it's the right thing. Using shame for enforcing compliance, something unfortunately I see done all too casually. And low availability of accurate wages, a well-known topic we have all discussed together many times before, and positions of work that are underappreciated. So at this point, not even necessarily about the literal value assigned to the work that you do, but the fact that you are also underappreciated, the work that you do is perhaps not recognized or even observed, and how that all together creates a very unhealthy system for us. And that can be true even if you have a very positive and healthy and supportive boss. So just recognizing some of the things that are present here and that have been present for a while. So this is before you add in any other current events like global pandemic starting off 5 years ago to current chaos for us in the United States. Speaking of which, events happening right now. We are doing this webinar when we premiere. It'll be for the new year. I'm really hoping that when this webinar premieres, we will be feeling at least a little bit more well-rested. Hopefully we've had a very peaceful winter break. Hopefully we have some things to be optimistic about together in January. But we need to also acknowledge that what has happened throughout this whole year has been incredibly damaging. And even if we focus on just the things that are happening in our field, of which we are, of course, a person with more than just that one thing, but even if we were just to focus on our field and the things happening there, the chaos started the day of this newest presidency, so in January, and has gone all the way through into like still this last week. And there's certainly been things to feel positive about. There's certainly been things that have happened that have been good, but most of it has not been great. And while happening for us in the States at the federal level, because our field is so relatively small, it is so susceptible to anything that happens at that higher level that the trickle-down effects of losing staffing at federal agencies, of losing funding, of losing that advocacy or guidance or even information from these agencies is crippling. And so it doesn't matter if you haven't worked or at a federal agency, you still have been impacted. And I think most of us understand that. But I want to highlight it for us as we take stock of this last year. And I think it helps to inform just how much is going on, because I think for us also, because we are typically more heart-led individuals in this field, it is really easy for us to try and dismiss or minimize what has been happening for us because we realize worse things may be happening elsewhere. But as my therapist would say, it doesn't matter if it is a puddle or a lake, you can still drown. So I just want to emphasize there's a lot happening here. So please don't minimize it for yourself. So to go over the bullet points, delayed federal budget approval, of which we're still seeing play out, and now going to impact, of course, this next fiscal year. We've seen federal staff cuts, so significant, even though some of them may have been brought back. At some point, we are seeing drastic brain drain and loss of those people, as well as loss of that work and collections care. We've seen attempted cuts or removal to federal grant funding, and even though some of those may have been reinstated, like significant damage has been done. Just taking the IMLS as one of those, and admittedly one of the smaller ones of some of our other agencies, the damage of not knowing and not having funds for some of the institutions that were awarded for this year, it was a 9-month period of uncertainty of where they had to let their staff go that were funded by that, where contractors had to move on, community partnerships being damaged. Like it is awful. So yeah, cuts to federal funding, even if it did come back, the damage is incalculable. The constant threat of closures, or the closures and then kind of reopenings, or the semi, we're going to let most of the staff go, but it's still kind of open. Like all of that has happened this year, especially with IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the NEH, National Endowment of the Humanities, NEA, the National Endowment of the Arts. I always mess up NHPRC, but the National Historic Public Records, so I'm going to say Commission. And then I left it off of this bullet, but the Historic Preservation Fund, which helps to fund our state historic preservation offices, our SHPOs, and of course our TIPOs, which is the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices. So all of that. And then, of course, for our field, the censorship issue, which can be the threat of being asked to censor, the anticipatory censorship that's happening because we as maybe agencies or organizations making these decisions think that grant funding might get pulled, or at this point for some of the grants, we have to agree to some level of censorship when we accept the federal funding, to it actually being enforced with federal colleagues or even those who are not federal, but in states or regions of influence where, for a variety of reasons, including safety, is enforced censorship. So there's a lot happening here. Not just the funding, but the support and the information these agencies hold for us, the support and the money they bring down to the state levels, which of course goes out to our local communities, in addition to just like the mental impact of having to deal with on a daily basis these issues that are in direct conflict with a lot of our professional values as a community, as well as our individual values. Trauma in the workplace. So we're getting trauma's happening in the workplace. We're also bringing trauma to the workplace, and that's a separate slide. But trauma in the workplace, we've got the usual suspects, which we'll mention, and then of course we've got the this is not normal times things happening, but discrimination, microaggressions, manipulation, especially in our field, as we covered, newly imposed pressures, especially for our federal colleagues who are getting it directly at the moment, severe cuts to staff and or funding. We know it's happening federally, and we also know it's happening across the country, even for those institutions not directly federally funded. We have forced compromises to balance professional ethics with executive orders or perhaps local politics of your particular area or region, and state of constant fear. So quite a bit of things that existed that caused trauma in the workplace, as well as new things or newer or larger now things that have been introduced for this year. And then trauma at the workplace. So we're not just humans that exist only in our workspace and we leave all of our personal things at home. We're bringing it with us. So continued onslaught of unprecedented, in quotes, events, because at this point we're getting precedented, threat, loss, denial of civil rights, to devastating levels in a variety of ways we are seeing play out, political division and upheaval, not fun for anyone, and really ripping apart communities and families, environmental disasters, which is at this point kind of seemingly a seasonal thing now, economic uncertainty for our field in general, again, because we're so small, we're so susceptible to any sort of shifts. And so having that federal impact on its own is very difficult to weather. And then, of course, the markers of economic recession that we've been seeing happening across this last year, and certainly, unless anything changes, well into these next few years. And war, while war is not happening currently in the States, and hopefully never, of course, war is happening elsewhere. We have families that are elsewhere. We have tender hearts that are invested in how well people are doing elsewhere. So there are things happening locally, but also globally, that are causing trauma for us as individuals, which we will then bring to where we go, and that is work. So just an acknowledgement of like, even if things are great at work, somehow people are still dealing with a lot of stuff. Okay, so how it takes a toll, which is important to realize, again, just to underscore, it's easy for us to write this off, to think it's only in the moment. And so I just want to emphasize the climate for burnout is external. It's not like it's you making bad choices or you staying in a bad relationship. The factor is external, but the cost is very personal. And so it's important for us to realize that as we consider our next steps. So it takes a toll. Excessive ingest of anything can be a coping mechanism, physical and mental overwhelm and fatigue, especially in that chronic stress state. This one is definitely one I have struggled with for a decade plus. Onset of exacerbation of physical and mental ailments, especially if you were already susceptible in one area, it can often be exacerbated, and a retriggering of past trauma and or the formation of new trauma. So mental and physical things apply, especially the longer bad things happen. It also, for us, sort of in a more subtle way, can impact the ability for us to make decisions. For me, it can even impact trying to get words out of my mouth, loss of motivation, even if you're not necessarily clinically depressed, even just being in the midst of overwhelm, it can be very difficult to move forward. Getting into that chronic depression piece, of course, and causes of anxiety and panic and adjacent, but also very impactful mental items. Withdrawing from support systems, which is super fun and something that I struggle with my depression, is the things you need the most are the things that you are least motivated to continue doing. And sleep deprivation or excessive sleep can all take a toll. And of course, each of these things are caused by you already not feeling well, and by their very presence makes it even harder for you to get to a place where you are feeling well, which is just like a added universal insult, in my opinion. So how to build resilience. So we cover quite a bit, and intentionally for this webinar, and we've talked about this type of topic off and on for the last few years, especially when the pandemic hit, but I really wanted to make sure, like, I think we get it at this point in terms of what's happening, how we're feeling, how it impacts us. I mean, if anything, from these last 10 years, I think we've gotten pretty adept at realizing that. So with that in mind, I wanted to spend more time thinking about what it looks like to build resilience in the midst of this ongoing chaos, in the midst of this like perpetual bad news reel. Again, even if you feel like you're in a space where things are not so bad, that is great. But I believe you're still being impacted and those you love are still being impacted. So what can we do? So thinking about resilience, I have a few things for us to work through, each concept of building on the previous. We're going to start with a reflection piece just to really take account of where we are at, what is happening, what we may have control or influence over or not. With that information, we're going to assess and prune where we're going to make some decisions to sort of tweak how we show up or what's happening in our lives, whether that is personally or professionally. We'll then get into like protect and fortify, which is, okay, we've made some decisions, we've tweaked some things. What does the advocacy for us look like at that point? And then moving towards the concept of fortification and eventual investment into the longer term of us feeling better. So goal overall is to feel better, but especially so with this webinar, trying to not just be okay in the moment, but hopefully build to be a little bit better than the day before. All right, reflect. So I've got some question prompts just to help you get your own brain going. And this, for my brain at least, is one of those where I need to think through it over the course of a few days. And so this is by no means like I'll ask you the question, you have the answer, but you'll get a copy to the slide deck. So please feel free to use it as you see fit in terms of brainstorming or answering these questions in your own time. So for reflection, what's been on the perpetual to-do list? For me, there are things where if it's been on my to-do list for a month, then at that point, I have to really wonder if it's a priority to even get done. What work helps you feel fulfilled, especially in this moment of burnout, and for me, especially in a moment where it's hard to fill things, especially positive things, having those few precious areas is very important. What work do you avoid or put off? And I realize in the work and even the home setting, there are some things that we can't stop doing, but are there things that we can maybe turn the volume down on or pause for a moment or perhaps just decide not to do? How's your schedule and routine working for you? For my brain in particular, it tends to get very locked in on a routine that may work really well in that moment, but I can still be doing that routine a few years from now and have it not work at all. But it doesn't occur to my brain to question it. So here's your question. Do you have enough time in the day? We tend to add quite a bit in, especially as a result of the global pandemic concept of Zoom meetings and fitting in even more meetings into our day as a result can make it seem like it's all meetings and never a time to actually do your work. How does your body feel most days? Reminder to check in with how are you feeling physically, because when you are in it, it can be very difficult to even realize the signals that your body is trying to send your brain. How does your mental energy feel most days? And how are we showing up? Is it different in both the work and professional, or in the work and home realms? And how do you feel right now mentally and emotionally? So really trying to check in, how's your body feeling, but also how are you feeling on the inside? Both can be indicators of how well or not you are doing, and indicate then at that point, like to what extent do we really need to start implementing some change. So personal example of reflection questions. So my body and mind function better with routines in place. They like routines. I need time and space from people to recharge. So showing up in spaces with a lot of people, I need to make sure if that has increased, that my rest recuperation time is increased. My body needs longer periods of sleep and a series of regular health appointments. As much as I really hate that that's the reality of my life, that does mean I do feel better more of the time. I need large blocks of time to accommodate my brain's ability to hyperfocus, which can be a great strength if you have it and can have the time to use it. So really learning how your brain works essentially and what it needs to thrive. And then committee service work with certain organizations make me more grumpy than happy. So for us, often the call to serve in an above and beyond capacity in our professional organizations, for example, can just be way too much. And unfortunately, some of our professional organizations are also not very healthy. And so sometimes that service work is more punishment than it is any sort of reward for anybody. So, as you've reflected and as you continue your reflection process, what I want you to move to is a rethinking. So, much like for me, who needs to rethink my routine that has been in place for a few years, we need to think about these questions and then rethink what we're going to do about it, or rethink how we are at least currently living our lives. So, we want to rethink everything that is not feeling good. We want to radically reconsider what our schedule, routines, commitments, and activities are. So, reconsidering committees you are serving on, reconsidering how you start your day, things like that. Perform major pruning of people, places, and activities that no longer serve you. And we're going to get to a little bit more into that pruning aspect in a moment. But that's essentially where we want to start heading, is we need to take out the things that are not working and that are damaging us in order for us to get to like that fortification and investment piece. Needing to clear the bad stuff out before the good stuff comes in. If you are a gardener, it's a very apt gardening metaphor in terms of like you need to remove all the dead plants and get the soil ready so that it can grow nice, new, and beautiful plants in the spring. Assess. So what work doesn't need to be done? It's would be nice. And thinking through prompts similarly, at the very least in your work sphere, what work can wait until there's better support. So hitting the pause button on work that is important, but perhaps not like a emergency has to happen right now. What work is crucial for you specifically to do? We tend to take on a lot of things, other duties as assigned, that just really actually aren't that important when push comes to shove. And maybe also it's not necessarily something you specifically need to do. And then look at the time you have available and the work you need to slot in from your to-do list. Does the math make sense? So again, rethinking our work schedules, at least in terms of how many meetings are in our day, how many hours do we actually have to do our work, with that available time, looking at our responsibilities and activities, compared to the actual time we have to do work. Does that math even make sense? And if it's helpful for your brain, I actually recommend doing the literal math on that in terms of the hours you have available, not in meeting time on average over the week, with the time it takes to each of those activities that you are supposed to be doing or you think you are supposed to be doing currently. And I guarantee there's going to be more on the list of to-dos than there is the actual time to do it. And presenting that to your boss, if you have a boss that needs to be presented to, and asking them to help you do the math in terms of like, there's obviously too much on this list here. So help me understand what makes sense to fit math wise, because nobody should be working unpaid overtime, especially if you're not well compensated in general as a salaried worker. So what remains after going through that assessment rethinking period may still be too much for one person. And so operations of the organization and your role in that case need to be rethought and radically reconsidered. And so having, for example, that conversation with your boss on like, literally need to help me figure out the math here because it's not mathable, and getting to the point where it's like we can all acknowledge here that this is impossible. So what is possible? Getting to pruning then, and especially if you're able to get support of your boss and or your colleagues, even if you do not have support of your boss, doing to the best extent possible, pruning of activities, responsibilities, or tasks that aren't your job. So like literally not in your job description. I understand we all have other duties as assigned, but within reason. So needing to like, because they're going to come back with that, and that is always the comeback is the other duties as assigned. And it's like, yeah, but not when it is unreasonable and there's not enough hours in the day or the appropriate compensation to do so. Then pruning the activities, responsibilities, or tasks that aren't essential for you to do. So really getting to, again, to that point of once you've identified the things in that assessment period that you yourself don't need to do, and it's not necessarily something that's in your job description, then maybe a volunteer does it, maybe it gets paused. The activities, responsibilities, or tasks that don't reasonably be fit into the one full-time employment person, so one FTE. Again, making sure that the math is making sense for you in terms of the hours you have in a day, in a week, and what it is you're trying to do. And then pruning the activities, responsibilities, or tasks that can be left behind or distributed elsewhere. So again, you don't have to abandon it forever. You don't have to cut it completely, but there has to be some changes or shifts made so that you can start building some space for feeling better. Thinking about pruning personally, and again, I encourage you to think of both because you're a complex human who has both work and personal life, but similar prompts in terms of pruning activities, responsibilities, or tasks that aren't contributing to your wellness, pruning the activities, responsibilities, and tasks that aren't essential for you to do, so similar prompt here. Pruning the activities, responsibilities, or tasks that don't reasonably fit into the structure of your life. Pruning the activities, responsibilities, or tasks that can be left behind or distributed elsewhere. And then people, places, and activities that no longer serve you. So really, to the extent possible of this radical reimagination and reconsideration of what it is that you've essentially committed to, even if it was not like a intentional and like every day I commit to this, it's essentially what you've ended up in your life currently committing to. So I'm asking you to rethink that. Moving into protect and fortify. So you needed to build some space, and that's hopefully part of what we've done in terms of rethinking everything, making some pruning decisions so that we can hopefully bring down the noise on the burnout contributors for the things that we have influence over, and making some space for the concept of protecting and fortifying yourself. As we get into this concept, I want you to think about four main ingredients for this recipe, essentially. Our four ingredients are time, energy, health, and spoons. time, like literal time in the day, time that we have, time that may be available. The energy, so our energy of which to do the things, how we're feeling from a like mental energy perspective in alignment. Health, which for us, mental and physical health, for everybody is different. So yours may be one more than the other, but you need to be in good health to do quite a few things, and therefore is a limited resource. And then the concept of spoons. So the amount of care you have, the amount of this is important to me sort of factor. So it's not just one of those, well, I have the time and I have the health so I could do it. You actually need to care about that thing. There needs to be a level of care for you to be invested to make it worth doing that thing, which is also, fun fact, a limited resource. So as we get into this concept, you have to earn and accumulate your resources in order to spend them, right? You can't spend money you don't have. And in order to accumulate those resources, it can be a slow process, especially if you're starting with very low resources, because maybe your health is impacted currently or your time is impacted currently with other commitments. Protecting and fortifying your resources is critical to how you function, essentially. And the better we can do about that, the more resources you'll have. And again, you can't spend what you don't have. So I want us to think about and think through as you go through your own reflection and pruning process. We need to then protect against those things coming back into our work and personal lives. So we need to protect against people, places, and events that suck up and absorb your time, energy, health, or spoons, especially if it's not fitting into a spot where it makes sense for you to do, where it's important for you to do, that you care about doing it. We need to protect against people, places, and activities that are, or excuse me, not protect against. In this one, you need to protect those things that are restorative to you. So you have likely heard the thing of hanging out with people or doing things that fill your cup. For some people, that is a very beautiful visual, but essentially it's the people who, or things, places that help you feel better, that help you get some of those resources back, whether that is energy, health, or spoons in this case. And then protect your ability and capacity to dedicate to the people, places, and activities that you do care about. So this is not just a like for us to feel better, but it's also for us to show up for the people and things that we do care about. So again, remember, if you spend your resources on a person, place, or activity that you don't value, that is actually not important to you, that you don't typically care about, it directly impacts and takes away from your ability to then engage with the people, places, and things that you do love. So there's a very direct correlation of doing things perhaps because we're not being super intentional and we're like, well, it's the right thing, it's the good girl complex in my case of like, oh, but that's helpful and for this person or whatever, and it ultimately it didn't mean much to that person and it took away from something else that means much more to me. Fortification. So we can't fortify ourselves until we've done all of the other work in terms of the assessing, the pruning, and the protecting. So we need to protect the resources we have. Now we need to move into this fortification piece. So making sure you've gone through those things first, assess, prune, and protect. And then starting to implement things like engaging in deep rest when your body asks for it. Deep rest was a newer concept to me a few years ago, again from my therapist. And it was a period of extreme work, fatigue, quite a bit going on. And while some of it was like champagne problems, I was depleting my resources more than I was restoring them. And so the concept of, if you take the concept of that work hard, play hard saying, instead having it be work hard, rest hard. And so if you are doing some extreme work periods or extreme periods of difficulty, you need a matching amount of extreme rest or extreme restorative activities, which was a concept that had not occurred to me prior to my therapist. Adopt regular physical and mental health therapies for me with my chronic pain, but also for my mental health. As I mentioned before, my life is filled with way more health things than I wish. However, those activities are things that help to fortify me and get more resources in other areas, like my energy and health resources. And if mental health is not for you, I get that. For me, with working with a mental health therapist, it's great. Perhaps community groups for you, showing up in some different alternative ways and getting your mental health restored that way also totally counts. And then acquiring places of joy and peace. And especially if we're in a period of our life where we're feeling extreme chaos and devastation, it can feel incredibly difficult to, one, seek these out or feel like they exist, but two, actually go to them and enjoy them in these periods because it feels wrong. I'm not sure why our brain logic wise comes to that conclusion, but these places of joy and peace, especially in the moment, are so critical for us surviving through this period of awfulness, as well as moving from that survival to hopefully building some resilience. All right, the final piece, invest. And this concept is to help grow those finite resources, typically grow the areas where we can. So we're protecting, we're fortifying, and now we're hoping to grow some of those limited resources. And so some suggestions for you are upgrading your life with better systems, routines, and tools. Again, I'm a huge person about routine. And so I am somebody who will be obsessed with a meal, and I will eat that meal every day. Right now, it's protein smoothies with this vegan orgain powder vanilla protein that you can get at Costco. And I don't know why it's so good, but it is, and I'm addicted. And so every morning I'm having a protein smoothie. But I have cut up the strawberries ahead of time. Like I do it once a week where I get all of the fruit and everything else ready so that my routine in the morning is faster and it is doing a thing that is ultimately healthy for me to help support those other things. So that's what I mean about this sort of life hack-esque of knowing what you need in your life on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. How can you get those into your life consistently and perhaps even more efficiently or at greater efficacy? Have some fun with it. Cultivate areas where you find satisfaction or ease. So finding spaces, especially in this time of just really feeling overstimulated, finding people, places, activities that are going to help bring you some peace at the very least, and may even help to restore you. Only making service commitments that are meaningful to you. So to invest in people, places, things where you will get some of that investment back, which is actually a healthy commitment and what I would encourage professional organizations who are perpetually doing those volunteer calls to think about. We just did that one. Grow your network of peers and trusted colleagues. And so for us, especially in this period of onslaught, we can feel really disconnected, especially for those of us as consultants, for example. We tend to be very disconnected except for our clients. And so still connecting with work colleagues on a peer level can be incredibly rewarding, even if it's just to connect on like what is happening, can be very supportive and quite an investment into your professional area at least. And then find internal and external allies and causes you care about and build on your affinities. So really focusing on growing of your community, finding your community if you've not found one, and having a area of where you may have like hit multiple tick boxes from this in terms of finding a place that brings you ease, doing a thing that gives you satisfaction, and doing it within a community where perhaps it's a give and take exchange where everyone benefits. So, summary of strategies, because I led you through a process that I think will be helpful, but also recognizing that sometimes we just need a list of the things that we learned. So, here's the list. Short-term strategies. Deaccession, to use a professional term, as much as possible. So essentially the pruning concept, however, because I know that quite a few of us are archivists and museum collections managers in this group, deaccessioning the things no longer make sense in your collection, aka your life, or that never should have made it into your life/collection. So deaccessioning, a good Marie Kondoing of everything sort of ephemeral and not actually physical. Continue being awesome at your job, because of course you are, even if you feel like you're not working 100%, often our 100% is more than normal 100%. But only perform your actual and within reason duties. Like, you're already doing awesome. And so if I ask you to bring it down to doing the job well, within reason, that's what I'm asking you to consider doing, because I know for so many of us, it's still up here performance level. Find pockets of support in or adjacent to your department. This is especially important for you to thrive well at work, especially if work is in fact toxic and not healthy. Then having spaces and people within there to sort of get that sanity check, to get that brief respite, is very important. Finding a professional community where safety, respect, and cultural building each other up is present. Even in your personal life, finding friends that are like that is also important for helping build yourself up, having that strategy. Celebrate accomplishments with your workplace, your network, and your community, especially in these times. Like, please give us the bright spots. I, for one, am ready for much more good news, even if it's just your good news at this point. Like, please share. We need it. We want it. We would like your good news, please. So please share it. Also, it's just a good professional practice for yourself to show and demonstrate and acknowledge the good and hard work that you are doing. Continuing short-term strategies, know your options for short-term relief. And this is especially important in the workplace setting. Thinking about even things from like start with a mental health day, or take a walk around the park for your lunch break, all the way through to strategically taking days off or vacation, to exploring short-term disability and what those benefits are. Those are all available and they exist for a reason. And so using them somewhat strategically, especially if you are in acute crisis of all these things happening and desperately needing relief for your health. Cultivate resilience with deep rest, mental and physical therapy, and restorative activities. Shore yourself up with people, places, activities, and things that rejuvenate you, pouring back into the cup, or whatever that little adage is. Whenever possible, remove yourself from abusive people, environments, and activities. In work, this can be somewhat hard to do, but it is certainly important to do. And again, even if it's temporary respite through something like short-term disability. And then working with a mental health professional or seeking out some similar support and relief for yourself mentally and emotionally. Longer term strategies. Know what the HR policies are regarding reasonable accommodation, paid time off, and short-term disability, which you can deploy as somewhat of short-term. You can also use it as more of a long-term thing, especially if you're in a workplace situation where you essentially know you need to leave, but may not have the financial luxury, at least, to leave in that moment. And so knowing what the policies are for accommodation to help make the day-to-day more reasonable, especially with so much prompting, at the very least, mental health things for us. Working with that, be strategic about your paid time off, And then I really do encourage thinking about the short-term disability. There's so much stigma around people thinking about short-term disability as an option. In fact, it's still quite shocking to me as someone who has gone through it that our our mental well-being is so wrapped up in our only value being to show up and do the job, and that somehow taking short-term disability is cheating. Like there's so much bad stigma around it that like even reasonable, sane, heart-forward people, their initial responses to me recommending this is frankly shocking. But we're all products of our capitalist society, and so um, anyway, I'm sorry to belabor the point, but because I know like 80% of you at least are like, short-term disability, please think about it though. Actually, it exists for a reason. It's getting codified in state law for a reason. Again, your states may vary, see the disclaimer, but it is an option. Please use it. Continue restorative practices to improve your well-being. Again, you need to, in order to even feel better, needing to have that restoration and hopefully getting to a place finally where you can build some resilience through fortification and investment. And a note here to start to build yourself an off ramp or an escape plan, because while we can't control, at least to my knowledge, a lot of what's happening in our current events, we can control our workplace and our personal life place. And at least from a workplace perspective, and especially if you're in a workplace that is incredibly unhealthy and making you sick, quite literally, you like eventually you need to leave. Like you're not going to get any better until you leave. And while that may not be immediately, because again, we may not have that financial luxury to do that, even just having the plan and the timeline and the working towards that can buy you some short-term relief. And then my note, of course, in order for short-term relief efforts to have maximum impact, you have to actually do it. Like you actually have to have the end in sight. Your brain has to actually trust, and your body has to actually trust that you're doing the thing and that you're leaving the spot that's making it sick. Strategies I didn't include, speaking with your boss. This is entirely a question of, do you know your boss? With a second question of, do you trust your boss? I have not had great boss situations, especially when it comes to anything not collections specific. You may have better experience. You may have someone who's super great. If so, and if you trust them, absolutely. In general, though, and if you're not sure, then no. Talk to them in specifics in terms of like my job responsibilities versus my time, but maybe don't necessarily disclose anything else about your mental or physical well-being. I did not mention speaking with human resources, HR. Again, I have not had great experiences directly in trying to use people who should exist to serve you, but actually the system is set up there to serve the organization or the company. They're not there to serve you. In fact, you can cost them money, and so their motives are suspect. Again, you may have a great HR. The statistics don't bear that out though. And so if you are not 100% sure, speak with them only to know what the policies are. And then don't disclose anything until you're actually like filing paperwork. I didn't mention trying to stick it out. It's it's often not worth it. Again, a lot of us don't have luxury of choice or making an impulse decision. But I don't want your strategy to be to stick it out, because that is not a strategy. And I didn't mention trying to make organizational change. Our field is full of very bright, very passionate, very heart forward individuals. And so many of you want to be there to help make positive change and to help make things better for you and your colleagues. And some of you are doing that. There have been some small and very specific organization successes. But I can't ask you to do that. And I'm not even sure you can ask you to do that. It's a level of sacrifice that, quite frankly, for our field is not worth it. And that is my opinion, and that is borne out through experience. This may be my least favored opinion that I have ever given on a webinar, but it is just not healthy, that sacrifice, and it won't be appreciated. And I'm not sure it will work. And I hate to see people going through it because they care so much, and just to see them get eaten up and spit back out. Moving on. Apparently, I can't end on an optimistic note for that one. Okay. So remember, we can both love and hate our work at the same time. I have done it. It's confusing, but very real. And it can make it hard to leave abusive, toxic, not healthy situations. Absolutely. Especially when we know that we can put ourselves through so much because we care and it's important. And yet, in the scheme of things, it's not actually worth what you're putting your body and mind through. You can have control over yourself, how you react, and what you choose to tolerate, which is helpful to keep in mind, especially when many of us aren't in positions of power or even in positions of real influence. And remember, change has to occur at the organizational level with full participation and buy-in from leadership and HR. And unfortunately, in Glam, changing the toxic situation for the better is a very rare occurrence. If you have a success story, please let me know. We may need to do a case study, but please just know that that is often the reality for most of us. So I've got pause time for questions. I know we've got some time, so we'll leave the questions slide up for you. And then I will pop back up. There's quite a few resources for us to take a look at and to leave you with, especially as you each make your way through this particular time, and hopefully having a better, but maybe at least more moments of peace in this new year. So getting into resources for you. Do you need more support? Absolutely. There were a series of 3 webinars. You don't necessarily need to watch all 3 to get it. Choose your own adventure, absolutely. These came out a couple years ago, but are still very true and very helpful in terms of the strategies they offer. They get quite a bit into specifics of the professional space. And while these are hosted by the Society of American Archivists, the links themselves and the actual webinar content are free. These are free resources, whether you are a member or not, to access and to get that kind of support. So you've got those. Resources for burnout. You saw these links as we went through the burnout section, articles used to help frame for us the what's happening and what does it look like piece of it. Resources for pay advocacy, because our value, and in this sense in literal dollars, does impact how we're feeling about our job and other aspects. And so the Ask Me Anything Career Edition, which I also get into a bit more of like short-term disability and my own personal experience navigating through stuff like that. We've got the webinar up on YouTube you can check out anytime, as well as How Much Am I Worth? This webinar, at this point, I need to do an update for. However, the resources and the strategies for how to calculate your worth are all the same. So update the numbers, but essentially you can help calculate what your market rate is, regardless of what your institution says your market rate is. Again, they are not actually motivated to calculate your market rate correctly. I've been through this process and was very young and naive, and at this point we need to actually figure it out for ourselves, and there's the data to do it. So I encourage you, if you don't know what your market rate is, watch the webinar and get it calculated. Resiliency and advocacy. These are some great books that have helped me think about resiliency and thinking through what it looks like to build resilience, especially in a state of like perpetual crisis. So check those out if you're a book person. Resources for the moment, the current events happening. So, thinking about impact and tracking data is very important. AASLH is doing so with a disruption impact survey. We've, of course, got federal employee and contractors that have been significantly impacted. And of course, for this field, we have an oral history project that is gathering oral histories from this time. So if you are in that camp, I encourage you to participate. We also have great resources and an organization that actually, in my opinion, has been doing the best job of all of our professional organizations navigating through this year, and that's the Association of Registrars and Collections Specialists. Doing resources, another great one is National Council on Public History. Again, small but mighty organizations, really putting their members' well-being first. And then mutual aid at work, so checking out mutual aid resources, especially as these devastating things are happening. If you are a federal worker, SAA put together resources for federal workers and access to free resources that otherwise would be paid. If you are trying to find a list of like all the things that have happened, not necessarily to read all the things that have happened, but to help get a sense of scale, the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council randomly has the best, most comprehensive and ongoing list that I have found of all the things that have happened federal level wise, nationally, that are having these trickle down effects, whether it's court cases, whether it's executive orders. It's been very interesting. It's a great spot to get the highlights. And if you are having a hard time communicating to your partner, your family, friends who are in the industry, just like the devastation and crisis stuff that's happening in our field specifically, this is a great link to send them. Again, not so that they have to read all of it. It can sometimes just be helpful to see, like, yeah, day one, all of this BS. And then, like, literally, like every week, there's at least one thing that has been happening. So just to help give sense of scale can be really helpful. And updates and resources on the impacts of executive orders. Of course, AAM, American Alliance of Museums, has a big advocacy arm, and so their alerts as well as their advocacy calls to action have been helpful. Speaking of things happening in the moment, one of the things we did for Relicura is launch a newsletter. Didn't typically do newslettery things. Usually we were like all about the webinars, the webinar today. But with everything happening and struggling with what I think we're all struggling with, of not feeling like we can really do anything that would have like immediate impact or relief, this was one of the things we felt we could do. So the moment is an evolving creature, but at the moment it is just once a month typically. We choose a topic that we feel is starting to become like an overarching theme of something, taking current events and sort of working through what does it mean, like bigger picture or like deeper meaning of these like seemingly crazy current event things. And then like, what can we do about it? If there's something we can do about it specifically, if there are things we can advocate for somebody else to try and do something who has power or influence, and a community care section, which has become, I think, the favorite part, partially because it's a bit of relief. But it can be things as serious as doing like mental health activities and as silly as TV shows and movies that may tangentially have something to do with the topic, but have helped provide at least our team a moment of relief. So if that is of interest to you, you can sign up for the newsletter specifically on our website. If you're just here for the webinars, then you yourselves are already signed up on the webinar list. But if you're watching on YouTube and don't get webinar emails, you can actually sign up for those specifically as well. So if you don't want the newsletter, you just care about webinars, you can do that too, because I get it. And keep in touch, especially in this time of disconnection. If the webinar has been helpful, that's always information that's good for us to have. If there's a topic you would like us to cover, whether as a webinar or in the Moment newsletter, also really happy to receive those ideas or suggestions. And overall, just hope that you all are keeping as well as you can, and that this webinar has been helpful at least a little bit in providing some quality of life improvement for you, because we all need to survive and make it through it, and hopefully in as best a shape as possible for each of us. So thank you for joining us today. Take care.